You heard it from Richard Dawkins.
I find that I like to live in a culturally Christian country, although I do not believe a single word of the Christian faith.
You heard it from Ayan Hirsi Ali.
And that idea that there is something above us, a higher power, I think that is rooted in Christianity, it's rooted in the Judeo-Christian traditions, and in many ways it is superior to the nihilistic Nietzsche-type atheistic theology.
You even heard it from Joe Rogan.
We need Jesus. I think for real. Like if he came back now, it'd be great. Like Jesus, if you're thinking about coming back
right now,
now's a good time.
Pretty soon, yeah.
The new atheists assured everyone that if we just got rid of religion, we would be a more rational society and things would be better. But that couldn't be farther from the truth. One time there was a man with the brain of a donkey. This donkey brain man loved apples, all type of apples, green apples, sour apples, Granny Smith apples, all different kind of green apples, all the apples you can think of, red delicious. He loved apples, but the one problem was he hated trees. He hated leaves and the bark and the smell and the roots. He hated trees so much. So one day he decided, with his hate for the trees, to take an axe and to cut down all the trees in the world. And sensible people with normal brains said, hey, you can't take away the tree and expect to still have apples. And the donkey-brained man said, well, I'll just get my apples from the grocery store. So he cut off all the trees, and then he would get his apples from the grocery store. And one day he went to the grocery store, and they had no more apples. And then our donkey-brained man spent the rest of his life crying and wailing, weeping and hollering, heeing and hawing, and wondering why there were no more apples. He couldn't understand that it was all his fault. He couldn't understand most of anything. Because he had the brain of a donkey. Who knew one donkey-brained man could cause so much trouble for the whole world? You know how most stories have a moral lesson behind it? Well, hold that thought. Let's talk about Richard Dawkins. Richard Dawkins has been spending his whole life destroying and trying to tear down Christianity, but at the same time wanting to live in a Christian nation and quote-unquote be a cultural Christian.
We are culturally a Christian country. I call myself a cultural Christian. I love hymns and Christmas carols, and I sort of feel at home in the Christian ethos. I feel that we are a Christian country in that sense. I would not be happy if, for example, we lost all our cathedrals and our beautiful parish churches. So I count myself a cultural Christian. If I had to choose between Christianity and Islam, I choose Christianity every single time. I mean, it seems to me to be a fundamentally decent religion, insofar as Christianity can be seen as a bulwark against Islam. I think it's a very good thing. I mean, I find that I like to live in a culturally Christian country, in Africa, for example, where you have missionaries of both faiths operating. I'm on Team Christian side as far as that's concerned.
Even in the midst of him proclaiming the UK as a Christian nation and a Christian country and how happy he is about that, and praising Christianity in that sense, and confessing himself to be a cultural Christian, he just can't help himself but to take jabs and to tear down the Christian foundation that he so rapidly wants to live in.
It's true that statistically the number of people who actually believe in Christianity is going down, and I'm happy with that. I do not believe a single word of the Christian faith. I must emphasize that I think that the things that Christians believe are actually nonsense. Do you actually believe that Jesus had a virgin for a mother? Do you actually believe he rose from the dead? Do you believe that his mother was a virgin? I mean, today is Easter, and of course I don't believe that Jesus rose from the dead. I don't want to be misunderstood. I mean, I do think it's nonsense.
He loves the apples, but hates the apple tree. Talking about trees, Let's turn to Matthew 13. He, Jesus, put another parable before them, saying, "The kingdom of heaven is like a grain of mustard seed, that a man took and sowed in his field. It is the smallest of all seeds, but when it is grown, it is larger than all the garden plants, and becomes a tree, so that the birds of the air come and make nests in its branches." Jesus said these words in the first half of the first century. Christianity started with Jesus and 12 disciples in the middle of nowhere in the Roman Empire, but it's engulfed the Roman Empire, became the prominent dominant religion there, and it grew. So that part is easy enough to understand. The church starts off really small, but grows so big it becomes a tree. But what do the birds represent in the parable? Small seed becomes a big tree. Birds come and perch in the nests that are in the tree. What do the birds symbolize? There are two broad perspectives on interpreting parables. You can take an isolated meaning, just the verse by itself, or you can take more of a broader, wide frame, looking at all of Scripture in totality, and then trying to understand it. For example, the story right after the story of the mustard seed is the story of the leaven. He told them another parable. The kingdom of heaven is like leaven, that a woman took and hid in 3 measures of flour, till it was all leavened. So leaven is something that you add to flour to make bread rise. You take a little bit of it, you put it inside the flour, and it spreads out all throughout the flour, leavening all of the flour, making the bread rise. Now, if you take this in isolation, you'll probably come to the conclusion that the leaven is the church, the flour is the whole world, the leaven is in the world, the church is in the world, it spreads throughout the world until it spreads all throughout, just like leaven does in flour. But if you take a more wide-ended, larger perspective, connecting the stories in the Bible and connecting the parables together, you understand that leaven is not a good thing. Leaven is represented as sin, as unrighteousness. When Jesus says to his disciples, "Beware of the leaven of the Pharisees," and they didn't understand, they said, like, what? Like the bread of the Pharisees? Like, what do you mean? And he says, no, did you not just see I fed everybody with all this bread, like the 5,000, they ate bread, and the 4,000, another time they ate bread that Jesus miraculously created. He's not talking about physical bread, he's talking about the doctrine of the Pharisees and Sadducees and the Jews of that time that were trying to corrupt them. This is what Jesus was warning them about. Do not be corrupted by that leaven, because just a little bit of it will leaven the whole lump. It'll destroy you. And Paul says the same thing in the Gospels. So if you take it in the way that the leaven is something bad that's working itself into the church is the flour. The leaven is the evilness, something that's corrupt that's going to make its way into the church and infiltrate it and try to destroy it. And you may think, well, it can't mean that because Jesus says the kingdom of heaven is like leaven. No, it's not the first word in the parable. No, it's meaning the entire parable, right? When Jesus says the kingdom of heaven is like 10 virgins, it doesn't mean the kingdom of heaven is literally like 10 virgins, but it's like the story, the parable of the 10 virgins that had their oil in the lamp and they were being prepared for the husband and the bridegroom. So when Jesus says in Matthew that the kingdom of God is like leaven, and he proceeds to talk about it, is he talking about it in a good thing, the leaven being the church, the flour being the world, or is he saying it in a warning to his disciples and his followers in the future that something evil and corrupt will try to make its way into the church, infiltrate it, and destroy it? Disclaimer, I'm not opposed to either one of the views, because at the end of the day, it can have multiple views and it can have multiple levels of depth inside of the Bible, and they can both be true. Jesus said we're dealing with the secrets of the kingdom here, so it only makes sense that there's a surface level understanding and then there are deeper levels underneath that level of understanding. Saying all this, let's get back to the parable of those pesky birds on the branches. The kingdom of heaven is like a grain of mustard seed that a man took and sowed in his field. It is the smallest of all seeds, but when it is grown, it is larger than all of the garden plants and becomes a tree. So the birds of the air come and make nests in its branches. What do the birds represent? Taking this verse in isolation, the birds may not mean anything. It may just mean, look at how big the tree is, look how big the plant is, the mustard seed, right? Birds can even land on it. That's how big it is, right? It could mean that. Isolating the verse more, it's just people and groups of people coming in to the church and finding refuge in it, right? Like Gentiles, right? And a couple Bible commentators and scholars think that. What happens if we don't treat the story of the mustard seed and the birds as an isolated story, but connect it with other scripture to interpret it and to understand its deeper meaning? Interestingly, Jesus talks about birds in another parable just before this parable in the same gospel. Jesus tells us what the birds there represent. Parable of the sower. That same day Jesus went out of the house and sat beside the sea, and a great crowd gathered around him, so that he got into a boat and sat down, and the whole crowd stood on the beach, and he told them many things in parables, saying, a sower went out to sow, and as he sowed, some of the seeds fell along the path, and the birds came and devoured them. Jesus is talking about different soils and different places where the seed gets sown and how it affects the development of those seeds. So the ones thrown on the path were out in the open, and the birds came and devoured them and ate them. Hear then the parable of the sower. When anyone hears the word of the kingdom and does not understand it, the evil one comes and snatches away what has been sown in his heart. This is what was sown along the path. So the birds in the parable of the sower represent the powers of the evil one. Birds symbolize something bad, opposition to the gospel, something that comes and snatches away the words of Jesus that were planted in man's heart when they don't understand it. The birds are snatching away the word that was planted in their hearts of Jesus that they do not understand it. And in the two parables, when we connect them, a sower went out to sow, and as he sowed, some of the seeds fell along the path, and the birds came and devoured them. And then we have the birds in the parable of the mustard seed. The birds of the air came and made nests in its branches. If some of the negative meanings carry from one parable to another, then it means that the birds that were taking the seeds that were cast on the path and devouring them are the same birds that are coming in the nests, right, of Christianity, right, the church, mustard seed, growing into a huge, huge thing, and the birds coming and nesting on it. This parable is a prophecy of the enemies of the kingdom and what they're going to do. Kingdom of heaven is like a grain of mustard seed that a man took and sowed in his field. A super tiny seed sown in the field, in the world. It grew in the world, became this huge enterprise, just like Christianity did in the first century. Just Jesus and 12 disciples, and it just multiplied and multiplied and multiplied. So that the birds of the air come and make nests in its branches. Christianity is going to become so big, so large, so amazing that even the enemies of the gospel, even the enemies of Christianity are going to come and live in those Christian nations, in those places that they hate so much and they keep trying to destroy. The ones that snatch away the good news from people's hearts about Jesus so they do not understand it, when they do not understand it. And these are the ones that are perched in the church's branches, in the realm of Christianity. They're perched right there in Christianity. The enemies of Christianity are going to feel quite at home in Christianity, on the tree, on that mustard seed plant. Where did Richard Dawkins say he feels at home?
I sort of feel at home in the Christian ethos. I feel that we are a Christian country in that sense.
But yet he just cannot help himself but snatch the seeds.
I must emphasize that I think that the things that Christians believe are actually nonsense. Do you actually believe that Jesus had a virgin for a mother? Do you actually believe he rose from the dead? Do you believe that his mother was a virgin?
Loves the apple, but hates the tree. Loves the fruit, but hates the roots.
I do not believe a single word of the Christian faith.
Not even about the parts that tell you exactly where you are right now, Richard Dawkins, that prophesies about what's happening to you right now, Richard. So Richard Dawkins and his followers are the smart ones in this situation, and we as Christians that see this prophecy playing out in the real world, we're the dummies for believing in it. Even though Richard Dawkins and his followers don't understand why the tree is falling down, even though they're blasting at it, destroying it, not understanding why it's falling down. But Jesus, 2,000 years ago, tells us exactly why and who is doing it. Their prophecy was, if we just get rid of religion and Christianity, people will get more rational and life will get so much better. What happened is when people in the West started turning away from Christianity in large numbers, the Western world started to go completely insane. How can the new atheists be the smart ones when they can't even see the obvious? How can these people think they're smart by living in a tree and chopping down the tree that they live in? How can people that think they're smart love apples but declare war on apple trees? How can people that live in a forest start a forest fire and think they're intelligent? How can somebody sitting on a branch saw off the branch they're sitting on, not understanding why they dropped? In Matthew, we read the parable of the sower, we read the parable of the mustard seed, and the parable of the leaven. In the same chapter, it talks about the spiritual blindness of people like Richard Dawkins and his followers. Jesus says, "This is why I speak to them in parables, because seeing they do not see, and hearing they do not hear, nor do they understand. Indeed, in their case, the prophecy of Isaiah is fulfilled, that says, you will indeed hear, but not understand, and you will indeed see, but not perceive. For this people's heart has grown dull, and with their ears they can barely hear, and their eyes they have closed, lest they should see with their eyes, and hear with their ears, and understand with their hearts, and turn, and I would heal them." So, my atheist friends, how do you like them apples?
That I see was a witness to the things that I know now. I'm 5 years out of school, super in debt. Got a house, not really a house, a basement for 2,000. Got a wife and got a baby, can barely afford the groceries that's in my pantry. But somehow we got 40 billion to send to Ukraine and to Israel to fund the genocides in the world. Everything is outdoors, ain't that so wild? We got homeless veterans on the street, addicted to fentanyl, meth, everything that you see. I'm trying to tell you, this shit will make your eyes bleed when you start seeing the reality.
This is for me, this is for all the children will have, so they can remember that their parents were in love and they gave a good example to follow Jesus Christ. That's the only example I'm trying to tell you.
Who were angry about what Richard about this whole thing, about this whole clip. They were complaining about this clip, and they were calling it kind of Islamophobic and this and that. People are stupid. Wake up and listen to what the guy is actually saying. Listen to why he has these concerns. Listen to the concerns that he's actually voicing. Listen to what is going on in the Islamic world as opposed to what is going on in the Christian world. In the Christian world, all you have to complain about is, oh, there are some Christians who are pushing Christian policies. Oh, some Christians, they believe in things that are not true. That's it. That's not the problem in the Islamic world. In the Islamic world, people's problem with Islam is not, they believe in things that are not true, or they try to push these and these few policies. No, it's We have no free speech. We have no freedom. We don't have the right to exist. We are killed. We are tortured. We have our rights taken away. We're lynched, brutally murdered, and so on. This is what Islam is. All your problems, all your concerns that you have with Christianity, which you want to get rid of and slowly work and talk away, those are non-problems. Those are non-issues compared to what Islam is. When Islam comes to your door, you will have a real problem.